See you guys soon.
There's no consent form, Jordan. There's nothing you can do about this.
It's upsetting. Making your rounds there, Tim.
Just call me Tony?
I almost did call you Tony.
I'm way better looking than Tony. That means you're calling Tony Tim, right?
Essentially. I don't know, it's hard to tell. I'm trying to eat. You're recording me. I'm very nervous.
Nothing to be nervous about. You're a beautiful man.
Don't put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. The internet's not ready for this.
The internet was born ready.
I do.
Al Gore created it for one purpose.
Me?
Right now.
I believe it. I'm pompous like that.
Oh, okay, so what's the end goal of the internet?
The end goal of the internet?
Yeah. What's its ultimate
Skynet,
purpose?
I think. Isn't that what Skynet, right?
I think that's giving them way more credit than they deserve.
I don't know, man. Net neutrality? What are we trying to be? Are we politically incorrect?
Hey, can you define net neutrality for me?
I don't think so. I mean, I have a good, like, I could give you the rough edges.
Let's talk about something else here. So you're having a nice meal there.
I'm trying.
Well, sorry. You get the Acropolis treatment. When one has food, everyone descends upon the...
That's perfect. Well, let me just, here, I'll put it away and then maybe...
Well, all right, see you later, buddy.
See you, bye. Bye, Tim. He's back.
All right, so, on the heels of the meal you just consumed,
yes.
Let's talk about Spam a little bit here.
Ooh, Spam. That's
you know,
fun. Not
just the delicious meat-like substance that you can get at your local grocery store.
That's an apt definition.
What, the meat-like?
Meat-like, exactly.
Similar to meat in a lot of ways.
Mostly related to meat, but we don't. Nobody knows. Can't be proven with science.
Okay. Now, what about the concept of Spam in games?
Yeah, so I fall on both sides of the coin on this because there are some situations I think that finding the most powerful option and using it consistently or competitively or whatever can be a good thing. And I think that is the case in maybe examples like video games or you know, things that don't necessarily, like, that aren't dependent on more than one person for a positive outcome.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, you know, if I'm playing, like, let's say, you know, PS4 game, and there's some sort of combination or character ability or whatever that's better than all the rest, well, I'm going to use that ability because that's directly indicative of the fun I get to have. You know what I mean? And the game's not going to care that I'm utilizing or abusing that.
Right.
You know, ability or technique over and over and over and over again. Now, when you extrapolate that idea and make it dependent on more than one person, so for instance, like I think you see this come up like in the video game example in fighting games a lot. You know, if you are fighting versus another real life opponent and that person just up jabs the entire fight. Well, two things happen. One is the game is taken outside of its intended element because you're not really getting those interactions that you know creators intended. And two, you get like the person who's doing like said spamming catches I think a lot of flack for being the one who's instigating that. You know what I mean? And like clearly the other players can adapt and like, you know, take some measure against it. And so that in and of itself is, I think, is just like a natural working. Some people just can't help but do that sort of thing. The problem happens, though, is when you take that same type of idea and put it in a context where you can't really do anything about that person spamming.
Right. You're alluding to the social contract type element, right? Like
right.
When we sit down to play a game, like we're agreeing to play by a certain set of rules, right? So spamming is not necessarily, it's not against the rules, right? I mean, it's not, nothing bans it, right? Nothing says you can't do it. I mean, we talked about Magic a little bit earlier, has like the limit of 4 cards.
Yeah, sure.
So, but there are ways around that, and right.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the Magic example, what happens is, you know, they limit it to 4 cards, but what you're really looking for is consistency. I think that that's what spamming is really, like the underlying issue of spamming is that people are searching for a consistent answer to whatever problem it is that they're facing. So in Magic, if you like to be very aggressive, you might only be able to have 4 of one card type, but if you have, you know, 36 cards in your deck that are all aggressive oriented.
Is that another kind of spam?
Is that a kind of spam? You know what I mean? Whereas really you're just latching onto a concept. So like it's tough to separate the two, because I think spamming is somebody's temporary solution to a problem that they can't fix otherwise.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So like somebody just wants to have consistency. They want to have a repeatable experience. And when you pull out the most, overpowered ability or the clearly the best option out of a group, and you're able to duplicate that option without restriction, it makes a lot of sense that if you don't want to look for another answer, that you just use the most clearly defined best choice.
Right.
That will provide you the consistency you're looking for, and in that you get the result you want.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, is spam inherently bad? I mean, because it has a negative connotation, but is it really bad?
So I think that in certain situations it can be, in certain situations it's not. So spamming itself is not bad. Like the idea of just finding the best tool for the job and then using that tool over and over again makes a lot of sense. You know what I mean? Maybe this analogy is not going to work, but we're going to go for it anyway. So if you had a hammer and a nail, and your goal is to get the nail in the wood, well, if somebody said, do this, right? If somebody said, do that 10 times, well, you're going to use the hammer every time. You know what I mean? You're not going to go find
You're not going to find a worse tool to do it.
Right, exactly. You're going to want to use the hammer every time. So when games or developers present you with a problem, i.e. the nail into the wood, and then only shape the scope of the game to point you to the hammer, there's a problem. And it has nothing to do with spam being bad. It's because the scope of that game needs to be more diverse, I think.
Is the problem then, what you're saying is there's just too many nails. So it's the whole thing, when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right?
Right.
So, but when there's literally only nails, you're not going to use another tool.
Right. When the field is all nails and one hammer, there's no reason to pick up a nail and say, well, let me give it my best shot, you know? You're just going to use the hammer because it's proven to work.
Now, is that poor sportsmanship?
I don't think so. I think that there is I think that the sportsmanship element comes from the attitude behind it, not the actions that you're doing, if that makes sense. So just because you chose to use the hammer doesn't make you a bad person, or doesn't make the spamming bad. What makes you bad from a sediment standpoint, where you're playing with somebody, is that you should recognize what you're doing. You know what I mean? The problem comes when somebody is slamming all the nails down, and it's because they have that holier than thou concept, where maybe somebody was trying to be creative and unique and not use the most overpowered option. They came up against a guy who's known to just use the best thing, and that guy just had a bad attitude with them the whole time. You know what I mean? From that standpoint, I think that the sportsmanship has nothing to do with the spamming of the units. It's the mentality that person brought to the table.
No, I agree, and I think what you're saying is it's dependent on the person. So if you're playing a game with somebody that's a good sport, but they're playing a spam or a cheese type list, it's not unenjoyable, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of the arguments of this stuff comes up has nothing to do intrinsically with the game you're playing or the tools that are in the game or whatever. It's all about who's across the table from you. And if you can't, as a player, it should be your overall goal, especially in the casual environment, should be to be enjoying what you're doing. And if that means winning is your form of enjoyment, great, but don't drag somebody else down because you want to win.
Right. Well, and then you get into the case, what happens when both people want to win and both people bring cheese lists, but but they're good sports about it?
Yeah, I think that I've had a number of games like that. Like I said at the beginning, I play both sides of the fence because, that's me. I'm inherently competitive as a person. I enjoy finding what combinations work well that are very strong, and then I like bringing those lists against other, in this case, Warhammer listing, but bringing that against other strong competitive lists because that's what challenges me. Right. And then in the game, we get to look at all the decisions we made and to figure out, okay, what could I have done different? Or maybe, how could my list have been better shaped to fight what you brought to the table? Rather than complaining about how what was brought up was, imbalanced or inherently wrong or whatever. I mean, granted, there are times where, developers and game designers let stuff slip through the cracks. That's undoubtedly happened. But, I think those are the outliers. I think that's not what happens consistently. What happens consistently is, a community gets together, identifies something as the be-all, end-all, and then ostracizes people who cling to that, and kind of forego people who maybe are trying to be more creative and find another solution to the problem.
Right. Well, we talked about playtesting in an earlier video and the importance of it, and basically we came to the conclusion that you're never going to find everything. You know, if you have unless you have a million people playing, playtesting, you're not going to find all the.
Yeah, sample size is everything. I mean, I think you see that time and time again in everything. You know, in the video that was talked about, for playtesting, these big AAA titles, like, they go to betas now because they know the more eyes they get on a game, the more closely that product can release to a complete state. You know what I mean? And that's one of the benefits and disadvantages of the world we live in now, is that a lot of games and a lot of things that we do that have this type of stuff built into it, they are formable. You know what I mean? It used to be that these products would release, and what you got is what you got. You know, you open your box or you open your video game, put it into your system route onto the table, and that was it. You know, that was where it was forever. Now, they could put out a game tomorrow. Somebody could find something very game-breaking, and they can fix it just like that if they wanted to. So you get a lot of... it creates a lot of tension, because what happens is, I think, people find these combinations, and then maybe a developer's slow to react to it, or worse yet, they don't do anything about it, because maybe that's how they intended the game to be. And I think that's where you get a lot of the friction, because people expect, like, that gratification of, okay, we found a problem, fix it. And when that doesn't happen anymore, that's where I think the conflict comes in.
Right. Well, okay, you look at old games, right? And for some reason, Chrono Trigger's coming to mind. Mm-hmm. Just, old classics like that who knows what kind of playtesting they did on the back end. Yeah. But when it's out, it's out. There's no patch for an old Super Nintendo game.
Yeah, there's no version 1, 2, 12, 100.
But those games have stood the test of time, right? What's different?
Well, I think that those games, I think, again, it's that mentality of, they knew, like, if we ship this product tomorrow, it needs to be the best it possibly can be, because we're not going to get a second chance to make an impression or to fix a problem. It needs to come out polished. And what's happening now is people are using the consumer as the shoe shine. You know what I mean? They'll throw out the dirty boot, and it's up to us to fix, to identify what's wrong, and then hope that they fix it. They're no longer bound to that, like, obligation of this being a final product when it releases. Right. That brings to mind the old, not Wizards, the old Blizzard kind of thing, where they would have a game in development, and if it wasn't up to their standard, they would cancel it, even after 4 years of development. Right. Yep. Now, it seems like things get put out, and then what you're saying is the onus is now on the consumer, to where now, if they don't like it, to voice that displeasure, or if people just sit on their laurels, the company doesn't change anything, right? Right. Is that kind of how the negative of it, that the companies aren't holding themselves to the same standard? Yeah, and I mean, I don't necessarily think they have to. I mean, I think that you get into some gray area there, because that might very well be what the game maker or developer had intended for that to function. And a little communication goes a long way, you know what I mean? So in this day and age where everything is so open, if an issue comes up, it should be addressed, because we have the functionality, we have the capability to, you know what I mean? Right, anybody can make a PDF. We're talking tabletop games specifically. You could put out a PDF in a day. Instant fix. Yeah, right, and it's gonna do a lot to correct the healthy state of whatever game you're dealing with. And so I think that helps eliminate some of that spammy issue, because as people see that stuff crop up, if the company is kind of Johnny on the spot and addresses that, it can eliminate a lot of the problems. Now, I think the real issue behind it, though, is whether or not it's fiscally beneficial for said company to do so, right? So I guess Games Workshop is a great example of kind of how this takes place, you know what I mean? Because for a while there, Storm Ravens at the beginning of 8th edition, that flyer spam list was a legitimate problem. They reacted to that very quickly, even though it was in their worst interests. You know what I mean? They could have let that list stick around and sold more and more Storm Ravens. And sold more and more Storm Ravens. But when you think big picture, if that's how they left the state of their game, how many more average consumers would have stepped away from the game because they didn't want to fork the bill for 6 Storm Ravens, or they wanted to play a variety of things. You know,
right.
so in reality, that's what I feel like true spam is something that's so negatively impactful that even if it's a short-term benefit for the company to allow it to take place, they redact it, fix the issue, so that long-term their game can be sustainable. I think that's really the key of the problem there, is that if something steps outside the bounds or confines of the developer's vision for the game, and it's duplicatable, so to speak, and it's so bad that they have to address it, then you're talking about spammy lists and things that are way over the top. You know what I mean? But if you know, and I think another good example of this is like Imperial Knights. You know, at the tail end of 7th and even Wraith Knights a little bit, they were there was a number of armies that heavily revolved around at least having multiples of those types of units. But we never saw GW do anything about it because the scape of the game was such that even though those combinations were powerful, and even though you could bring them in multitude, other things in the game could counteract what's going on. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's other elements that you can bring to the table that prevent that from being the be-all, end-all. So as somebody who runs a list like that spamming, no, they found a strong solution to putting the nail in the board. Now it's your job to see, okay, if that solution is the strongest now, what do I do to combat that? You know, it keeps you mobile, it keeps you versatile, and it forces your brain to engage in problem solving. So I think it's really beneficial for the game because now you've got a whole player base trying to figure out, okay, what the heck am I supposed to do to stop this seemingly very powerful interaction? And if the game is in good enough shape, you'll see that take place. Or you'll see, hopefully, the developer react in a positive way and step in to accommodate or fix the issue.
Very well put, my friend. Here, I'm going to do a on-camera.
Awkward shake.
It doesn't have to be too awkward. Hey, thanks for your opinions, and much appreciated, man. I thought it was pretty well put. So
I will say one last thing on the issue of spamming, and I think that we alluded to it a little bit at the beginning, and if you've watched any of the other videos in these segments, I think that one of the key factors that comes up time and time and time again, it's about who's across the table from you and what they're. Artie, I might just cry. You might. I'm gonna see you. I miss you too, man. You're a good guy. But what I was anyways, what I was saying was, it's really about who is across the table from you, and if you can, you should be the person you'd want to play against every game you play, whether it's tabletop, video games, and I think you can stretch that out outside of the gaming world and everything. But you know, if you act how you would want somebody to across the table from you to act, you're gonna have a good experience every time, whether you're bringing a powerful list or a unpowerful list, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't make a difference because you're going to be playing, with an attitude that is a winner's attitude, and whether you win, lose, or draw, you're going to have a good experience. And I think that's what makes gaming great.
Very well said. I couldn't agree more. That it's the experience that's important, not necessarily the result. Mm-hmm. And if you're a decent human being with it, everything's going to be fine.
Right. And if you're not the type of person who wants to put yourself in an environment that breaks those boundaries. What I mean by that is if you go to a tournament and you expect everybody there to be happy-go-lucky, and especially if there's something on the line, you're asking somebody to step outside the confounds of like normal humacy or whatever. I don't know how to put that right, but you're asking somebody to act in an environment differently than what they should normally act. If you put somebody in competition, expect them to be competitive.
Right.
If you take somebody outside of competition and put them in a fun environment, expect them to have fun.
Right.
And I think if you can not blur those lines like people try and do, that says everybody has to go to a tournament, has to have fun. That's not true.
Right.
They're at a tournament to win. That's why they call it a tournament.
Right.
If it was a play date, they would call it a play date. So I think it's really important that you make those distinguished boundaries. And when you're in the environment that calls to be competitive, be competitive. When you're in the environment that calls to have fun, have fun.
I agree with that. Good stuff, man. I like it. Say hi, Artie.
Hi, Artie.
Yes, he did it. He did it. Yes.
Has Artie never been on camera before?
No.
Look at this.
Artie, you didn't realize you were on camera before?
He showered me with lavish gifts, and he's trying to run away. He's a beautiful soul. Chase him down. Give him. Come on.
You gotta get the Jaws theme.
You know what we should do on camera, Tim, is break out into song like we did the night before I left. That was something special.
I'll never forget it.
I gotta go.
All right, hey Jake, thanks, bud.
Bye.